Hello everyone, I'm Sahid. Thank you for clicking this video. I'm very happy that you're here. Today I'll be continuing my chapter series on Blessings by Chukwuebuka ibeh, and today I'll be reading part 2, chapter 8. So before I start my video today, I just want to say thank you for your continuous support. And if you're new here, welcome. Please, before you watch today's video on the reading I'll be doing for chapter 8, please kindly watch my previous chapter videos as they give you a bit more idea of sort of how we got to the point in which I'll be reading about today in chapter 8 of part 2. But before I start my reading today of chapter 8, I want to sort of go or do a brief recap of sort of what we've read so far, particularly focusing on the last chapter, because I don't want to sort of repeat much on the sort of the first few chapters, but focus specifically on the last chapter, which is why I would suggest kindly watching the previous videos, as just I summarize what I read from part 1, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and then part 2, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. So please kindly watch those videos before this one. But to sort of do a recap, in chapter 7, we sort of explore Obifuna's early childhood. And during Obifuna's early childhood, he experienced a fever that really scared Uzamaka, and this fever, had her worried. I remember that in sort of the beginning parts of chapter 7, it mentioned how she was on her knees. She was on her knee, sort of begging and praying that he continues to fight through the sickness. He remained in that position until the next morning when Obifuna sort of sees her. And this was around when he was like 5, so obviously this was something that he probably felt really sad seeing his mom sort of kneeling, holding his hands in a position like that. And also it probably meant a lot to her seeing him being awake after that really horrifying period of sickness that he experienced. And then in chapter 7 we also sort of get more into sort of how Uzamaka just overall felt as though Obifuna, was very special to her. He always remained close to her, and she always felt as though she was one who truly knew him the most, or sort of knew him the best. She felt, her alone was the one who truly understood him. Like another occasion was when they were at a church, and sort of, this prophet, is it prophet? How do you pronounce that word? This sort of prophetess sort of noticed Uzamaka with her pregnancy with Ekene and her newborn baby Obifuna. He was around, I believe, a year or more old at this point, and this prophetess sort of carries him, and she walks around in the row at the church. And this is what really made Uzamaka feel as though he was really special. And there was another occasion that we read about in chapter 7 in which Obifuna was at home with his parents having dinner, and prior to this dinner, ngozi had an occasion in which he borrowed money from one of the people that he worked close with, or somebody that worked at a shop close to his shop. his name was Uduaka, and Uduaka sort of gave Anozi money, but he went to use it on gambling and he wasn't able to return it back. And so Anozi basically is, continues to threaten them until at some point he came to their house while they were having this dinner. And when he came to the house, Uzumaka quickly was trying to sort of hide Anozi, but then Obifuna went to go open the door. And, in her mind, she was sort of scared that, Uduaka was going to kidnap Obifuna Ekene. But when Obifuna goes to open the door, he sort of looks at Obifuna dumbstruck. And then, his fist sort of clenched up in the air, mid-air, and just sort of not knowing what to do in that situation. And so he just ends up looking at him and just leaving. And, Uzumaka felt as though that was like a really crazy coincidence. It was nothing like what she was thinking in her head. And the fact that he just left after seeing the boy meant something to her, and she felt it was something special. And she tells Analzi, doesn't really see it as something special, but he, sort of has this sort of feeling of wonder, and he's sort of like, how could this have happened? But, that's was something that also contributed to her feelings of why Obifuna was just something different. He was different. He was special to her. And as his mother, she had all these dreams about just seeing what his future would be and how he would, become something great. He would do well in school. He would get into top universities. He would have a family. And all these things just moved her and had him really close to her heart. And later on, we have a part in chapter 7 in which we sort of explore. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, sorry, I thought it was in chapter 7 that we had the occasion in which. Okay, yeah, it was chapter 7, anyways. And in addition, in chapter 7, we also have a moment when Uzumaka sort of gets to the point in which she feels as though she needs to go see her son at his boarding school because they weren't able to go visit him on visiting day, which is the day close family relatives go see their students at the boarding school. But unfortunately, they didn't go to see him due to, I guess, according to what Anozi said to his son Obifuna, was that they were busy, and this made Obifuna really sad. But his mom sort of confronts Anozi and says, I want to go see Obifuna, and Anozi sort of trying to prevent her from going, but despite that, she courageously goes against that and sort of tells him that we've been married all these years, whether you like it or not. I'm going to go see my son. And he was sort of speechless and taken aback, and he's like, really, this is what he's getting into now. But she, this is somebody she misses. She's not seen her son for a while, and she wants to go check up on him, and so she goes regardless, despite the little argument that they have. And when she goes, she at first dealt with some gay men who weren't really letting her in because they felt as though it's not visiting day and it's not really a break, and there wasn't really a reason of her coming. But she felt as though the simple reason of her coming to see her son was enough. After that, thankfully an older man told her that he was going to be available to see her during break time, and so she was later able to see Obifuna. And then during break time, when Obifuna sort of comes out, they meet, and he's not like his usual self, and she noticed some slight difference, first of all, in his appearance and in his character. Now he has sort of more hair, something, when he usually was with her at home, he had shorter hair. It was something that she would help him cut, and level shorter, maybe at her salon or something. And she also feels as though he has got into more of his manhood. He's sounds a bit different. He looks, I guess much older in his appearance. And all these things she felt as though, happened so quick in a short period. And, his character also seems a bit different. And, when he says certain things, she feels a sort of different energy to it. Even when he compliments her, it's not like the usual full of enthusiasm, sort of that enthusiastic sort of compliment. And she noticed differences. And the meeting, she asks about sort of his boarding school experience, and she lets him know that you could still come home if you would like. But he, when she asks these things, he sort of responds in a very vague way. And he sort of, when she even asks about like the teachers, he's like, the teachers are good. And she asks about his friends, and if they're good to him, and he sort of just responds like, oh yeah, they're good, and responds in a very vague way. And in his mother mind, he feels as though why wouldn't you sort of bring your friends to come meet your mother? And so she was sort of reflecting in her mind that it's just like too old fashioned for kids nowadays to maybe bring their friends along to meet their mother. But it's not really the case. And I think, first of all, boarding school has completely changed Obifuna, um and also due to what has happened in the house that he recently found out about when a boy came to visit him, he probably also feels as though his mom knows what's going on, and he feels fearful in a way to express himself. And also due to the bullying that he was experiencing in school, and even prior to going to this boarding school, it's really caused something that's damaged a part of him that wasn't really like him when he was a child, when he was younger, when he was so carefree and much sort of opened and true about himself, and sort of, I guess, free in his identity. So yeah, his mom's. There's also a moment in which his mom sort of asks about the mark that she saw on him, but he sort of lies like it was a fall, despite knowing deep down that it was students that did this to him. And she was taken aback to the days, when he would come back home from school with bruises, and she would ask him, and he sort of tells her, "Oh yeah, it was just from a fall." So she noticed that it's a lie, and then he was most likely getting bullied. So she's taken aback because of that. And then to add on, the break time had to sort of come to an end at some point, and so Obifuna had to return to school. And before they say their goodbyes, or when they were saying their goodbyes, his mom sort of tells him that a boy said that he hoped he is doing well. And when she said that, his face sort of just brightened up, and she noticed that. And at first she was like, oh, throughout this whole meeting, this is the first time he's looked so full of joy, and she was surprised by that. And this made her sort of think to herself and have this belief that, oh wait, my son must be in love and stuff like that. And so that's sort of how chapter 7 is concluded. But it was interesting reading that, because in my head I thought, so she finally finds out, and how is she gonna feel about this? And so now I'm going to read chapter 8, but hopefully we sort of get to see slightly her post realization of this new thing, or this thing that's been going on, but she's just finding out, but her father or her husband already knows. But yeah, I wonder how their relationship is going to change, how she's going to view him. And I'm also curious in sort of more on Obifuna's boarding school experience, and if Senior Papilo is going to appear again in this book. So yeah, thank you for being here. And now I'll read chapter 8. Part 2, chapter 8. The final day's sermon was on the theme of Christmas. The chapel had been given a makeover for the occasion, and now, as the chaplain went over the significance of Christ birth, and the value of newness. Obifuna stared up at the ceiling fan above him, decorated with multicolored balloons that swished as the blades moved. He was unaware of when the sermon came to an end, until Jeku nudged him, prompting him to rise, as the others did for the benediction. Merry Christmas in advance, my children, the chaplain said from the pulpit, and Obifuna watched as the boys turned to repeat it to one another. Back in the house, he lay on his bed without packing, wheeling away the noise from his roommates, from the entire student body, excited to leave. Do you not want to go home? Wisdom asked. Obifuna sighed without responding. He felt a fatigue he did not understand. An odd premonition had wrapped around his shoulders from that morning and would not lift, so that when, finally, his father arrived and informed him, as he got into the car, that he would be spending that holiday and future holidays with his paternal aunt in Owerri, he wasn't surprised. Is Ekene there? He asked. No, his father said, and did not elaborate. And as they eased out of the school gate into the main road, Obifuna understood then that his punishment was ongoing and never to be questioned, to be accepted quietly instead, with as much grace as he could muster. His aunt's home, on a quiet, tree-lined street off the Aladiman housing estate, charmed him. Obifuna had only a vague recollection of that woman. Obifuna had only a vague recollection of the woman from brief visits to the village when he was small, and he had been prepared to despise her, but he found himself enamored with her and fascinated with the large house. He had a room to himself, previously occupied by one of his aunt's sons, who now lived abroad. He spent whole days alone in the room watching television, coming out only to greet his aunt before she left for work and after her return. His aunt disapproved of his weight and had to help serve him food at intermittent intervals, jokingly vowing to make up in 2 weeks what he had lost in months. On Christmas Eve, his mother called. Obiajulu, his mother said. It seemed such a long time since he had been called that. Kedu? I'm fine, Mommy, he said. He did not realize he had been holding his breath until he felt a little dizzy and put his hand to the wall to steady himself. I'm so sorry you couldn't come home to us, she said. Daddy just thought it would be easier for you to go there since it's so close. Obifuna nodded, and then, realizing his mother couldn't see him, he said, Yes, ma. Is your auntie good to you? She asked. Yes. Mwano, greet her for me, oh, and please be a good boy to her. Yes, ma. Obifuna said again. He handed the phone back to his aunt, and as he walked back to his room, he remained light-headed. He had been so certain that she was calling to tell him that she knew, having easily put the pieces together, finally seen what had been in front of her all along. Or perhaps his father had simply told her, realizing suddenly that he and Obifuna had agreed no pact for secrecy, especially where his own mother was concerned. He wondered about a boy. Last Christmas, a boy's first and only with them, their father had come home with a chicken on Christmas Eve and saddled a boy with the responsibility for killing it. Obifuna watched with Ekene, excited as a boy dug a hole in the earth, holding down the squawking chicken with one hand and running the knife across the chicken's neck with the other, taking it out in one slice. For days afterwards, Ekene would reenact the chicken struggle, much to Obifuna's amusement, but a boy never laughed. It didn't even do it like that, he snapped one time at Ekene, startling everyone and putting a permanent end of Ekene's show. With the onset of the external exams in May, Obifuna saw less of Senior Papilo. Since the SS3 students no longer had regular classes, only dressing up on the days when they had exams, Obifuna had less laundry to wash. And on the days when he did have papers, Senior Papilo was finished so early that he'd already had his clothes delivered by someone else before Obifuna could reach the house. He sensed a new remoteness about Senior Papilo, attributable to his tension from the exams. Still, Obifuna missed him. He would, in the middle of a lesson or random discussion with the boys in his house, peek out of the window to see Senior Papilo strolling in the distance with a group of his friends, and feel a crushed longing at those easy strides, that slight slouch that raised his right shoulder, how effortlessly he stood out. And so, when on a Thursday afternoon after class he received a summons from Senior Papilo, he was almost dizzy with an unfathomable gratitude. Senior Papilo was squatting next to his cupboard, pouring cornflakes into a bowl when Obifuna arrived. He reached into the cupboard for a spare spoon and handed it to Obifuna. "How did it go?" Obifuna asked. Senior Papilo shrugged. "Physics." His forlorn expression communicated the rest. Obifuna watched him scoop spoonfuls of milk into the bowl. He tossed a few cubes of sugar next, stirred evenly. His low-cut hair had wavy curls that ran diagonally across his head and shone from his meticulous application of hair oil. "Are you going into town today?" Obifuna blurted out. Senior Papilo gave him a sideways glance from his squatting position. Slowly, his contemplative expression dissolved into a smile. "Why, you want to come with me?" he asked, returning the packet of cornflakes to his cupboard. It would mean scaling the school walls. They could be suspended if found out, and if the reason for the scaling were to be uncovered, and he had a feeling it wasn't a good reason, they could be expelled. But Obifuna thought of the few weeks left until the end of the session, after which he might never see Senior Papilo again, and so he said yes. Senior Papilo paused for a few seconds, and then he proceeded to fix the lock on the cupboard. Finally, he turned fully to watch Obifuna. Obifuna could not read the expression on his face, and he wondered if Senior Papilo would burst into laughter or reach for a belt. Obifuna felt time slip past him. "Meet me at the school farm at 8 o'clock, Senior Papilo said, finally, not a minute late. At prep, Obifuna flipped idly through his book, not attempting to grasp a word. He was about to do an incredibly stupid thing for which he could be expelled. He toyed with the prospect of not showing up, whipping up the excuse of a sudden stomach ache, an assignment, preparation for a test, all of which he knew Senior Papilo would easily see through. At 7:45, he exited his class and made for the school farm. The gate was unlocked and squealed when he let himself in. He immediately made out Senior Papilo's silhouette among the slender coconut trees. Senior Papilo looked at his watch and gave an approving nod. He handed Obifuna a shirt and a pair of jeans. "Chijioke will join us in a minute," he said. Obifuna tried not to flinch. Why was the agric perfect joining them? His first thought was a cult initiation, and he felt a queasy sensation in his stomach. His mother's partying warnings the nights before his departure for school, replaying too loudly in his head. He had heard stories of how new initiatives were whipped continuously with machetes until those who were unable to withstand the training died. He searched Senior Papilo's face in the dark for a sign, but he could make out nothing from the senior's placid expression while he waited for Obifuna to get dressed. Obifuna was in the middle of buttoning up his shirt when they heard footsteps approaching. Senior Chijioke came into view. His confused glance moved from Obifuna to Senior Papilo. "He's coming with us," Senior Papilo explained. "Are you crazy?" Senior Chijioke queried. "Relax." Senior Papilo looked Obifuna over and seemed satisfied with his brief assessment. "He can undo it. They will never let him in," Senior Chijioke pressed. "Of course they will, for the right price." Senior Chijioke seemed unconvinced still, but he shrugged and led the way further into the farm. Obifuna followed behind, feeling that queasiness again. Perhaps he could change his mind and turn back. Senior Papilo would be furious with him, but he could handle a few punishments. When they got to the wall, Obifuna looked up at the sharp puddles jutting atop it. How did they intend to scale it? Without speaking, Senior Papilo and Senior Chijioke set to work clearing away a patch of grass at the base of the wall. Afterwards, Senior Chijioke extracted 2 blocks from the base, revealing a small hole large enough to crawl through. Senior Chijioke went first, fitting his legs through and then the rest of his body. Senior Papilo nudged Obifuna forward, opting to go last as he fitted himself through the hole. Obifuna imagined for a panicked second that he would get stuck, unable to move in or out. Outside, the path was deserted and stretched all the way to the main road, where they boarded a taxi. They were quiet through the drive. Even Senior Chijioke was no longer his cantankerous self, and he stared out of the window in pensive silence. Senior Papilo was in front, next to the driver, tapping on his knees as he did when he was deep in thought, not turning once to meet Obifuna's eyes. Finally, he mumbled something to the driver, who turned to him with a skeptical glance before he looked back at the road. Obifuna could make out the slight lift of the driver's chin in a small smile. Obifuna swallowed, feeling the swift rush of wind pass his ears. The driver finally turned into a narrow path. Obifuna peered out of the car at the fading lamps that lined the street, faintly illuminating the faces of the women who stood about on either side of the lane, inched forward as though waiting to hail a taxi. Obifuna took in their low-cut dresses, showing too much cleavage, their postures demanding attention, their faces shaded behind sunglasses. The driver stopped in front of a gate, still smiling his sickly eye. When they alighted, Senior Papillo led the way to a gate painted a green color. A massive man in a shiny jacket blocked the entrance and regarded Obifuna with a vicious glare. Senior Papillo crossed a hand over Obifuna's shoulder and extended a single naira note folded in his palm to the man. The man received it after a grudging pause and held the gate open, wagging a warning finger in Senior Papillo's face. Inside the vast yard, a row of paved bungalows lined both sides, and several women were strutting about. With a parting nod at Senior Papillo, Senior Chijioke left the group and walked towards a dimly lit corner of the compound. Senior Papillo guided Obifuna towards one of the girls sitting on the pavement on the right row. She was holding a pocket-sized mirror to her face as she applied makeup by torchlight. "Where Angel dey?" Senior Papillo asked. The woman looked away from the mirror and fixed frosty eyes on them, her eyeliner suspended in mid-air. "I look like Angel Keeper." "Sorry," Senior Papillo said, not looking sorry at all. "But you know where she dey?" The woman snapped the mirror shut and put it in her handbag. "Angel dey busy with customer now, but I fit be your angel this night." Her expression had turned sly. Senior Papillo snorted. He had the slightly agitated look he put on when his patient was being tested. "Which room?" The woman stared at him wide-eyed. "You won't go meet them there?" she asked. Senior Papillo glowered at the woman without offering a response. At first, she stared back in defiance, but she faltered eventually, as Obifuna knew she would, and pointed to a door on the opposite row. As they walked away, Obifuna turned to see her watching them. Senior Papillo knocked on the door the woman had indicated. Obifuna shifted, slid his hands into the pocket of the oversized jeans to try to keep them from shaking. Did Senior Papillo really intend to interrupt them having sex simply because he wanted to see Angel? The door opened after a few minutes, and Obifuna barely restrained a gasp as a large, thick-set woman appeared in the doorway. From her name, he had expected a younger, prettier woman. "Angie, baby," Senior Papillo called out. The woman sighed almost wearily. "Papillo, how now?" "No shaking." He looked past her into the room. "I hear say you dey busy." Angel frowned. Busy? Who tell you that one? Senior Papilo tilted his head back towards the other woman. Obifuna turned just in time to see her avert her eyes. Angel snorted. Yeah, girl. She looked at Senior Papilo. I know they work today, oh. Now off day. Ah, Senior Papilo said, scratching his head. Why today now? I bring my boy come make him collect one round. Obifuna froze. Angel looked down at him, registering his presence for the first time. At first her face was blank, and then she burst into laughter. Obifuna glanced from her to Senior Papilo. Now joke be this? Angel asked when she straightened up. Ah, Angie, no look I'm like small pikin no. Now old man be this. And this thing no small. He reached down with a swift movement to cup Obifuna's bulge in his palm, causing Obifuna to suck in a quick breath. Angel watched the spectacle with amusement. Anyway, as I talked before, I know they work today. Senior Papilo reached for his wallet. I go pay double. Angel sighed in feigned exasperation. She looked at Obifuna again, laughter lurking in her eyes, but he knew then she would give in. Okay, she said finally. Just because saying a fine boy sha. She winked at Obifuna and eased inside away from the door. Obifuna looked at Senior Papilo. He stared back at Obifuna with eyebrows raised and motioned for him to go in. Obifuna took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was small and square with a lingering smell of damp. It was bare, save for a mattress made up as a bed next to the wall, a tiny plastic table, and a built-in wardrobe that held only empty hangers. The walls were almost completely covered with posters of American superstars. There were no chairs where he could sit, and so he stood in the middle of the room and tried not to listen to Angel's conversation with Senior Papilo. He saw her retrieve the money from his hands and shut the door behind her. Quiescently, she reached behind her back to undo the zipper of her dress, slid it off, and piled it in a disorderly heap on the table. She took off her underwear, not glancing at him once, not showing surprise at the fact that he was yet to undress. When she was completely naked, she slid into the bed and propped a pillow under her head. Obifuna stood where he was, staring at her. What is it? She asked, finally looking at him. Obifuna sucked his tongue to unfreeze it. He wondered if Senior Papilo had left him and gone back to school. He wanted to turn towards the door and let himself out of the room, but his legs had turned to jelly. Angel got on her knees and crawled to the edge of the mattress. She reached out a hand to him and pulled him to her until he towered over her, glancing down at her. Now your first time? She asked in a low voice. Obifuna nodded. Angel studied his face closely. How old are you again? Obifuna swallowed. Something in her eyes told him it would be useless lying to her. 16, he said. Almost 17, he added unnecessarily. He felt her grip on his arm slacken. He wondered if she was going to push him away. That would mean returning the money Senior Papilo had given her. Perhaps she was aware that someone else would gladly take him for the normal rate. There was a moment when he felt her teetering, weighing up her personal ethics. Finally, sighing, she reached upwards to unbutton his shirt. She worked feverishly, her breathing coming in rasps. As she undid the hook of his belt, he kept his eyes focused on a picture of Rihanna on the wallpaper behind her, feeling a small discomfort at the way the eyes stared right back at him. Angel pulled down his jeans, and he stepped out of them, still looking at the poster. She took his penis in her hand. "This one no be 16, no," she said with a whistle, and he blushed. She fiddled with his penis for a short while, trying to decide what to do with it. When she took him in her mouth, Obifuna let out a gasp. He could tell that this was not standard protocol, and he wondered whether to be flattered that she had chosen to make an exception for him. He felt himself grow in her mouth, hardening to stiffness. His toes had begun to curl on their own, and his knees felt as though they would buckle at any point. He wondered if part of the arrangement at the door was for Angel to rate his performance to Senior Papilo at the end of it, if Senior Papilo would begin to look at him differently if he passed. Angel pulled away from him and retreated further into the bed, spreading her legs. Obifuna crawled in beside her, overwhelmed at that point by the urge to throw up. He sat up naked beside her and looked around the bed. Angel said, "What is it?" "I need a condom," he muttered. She looked taken aback for a minute, and then she laughed. "Small boy like you, which disease you won't carry?" She reached sideways for him and pulled him to her, guiding him between her legs. Inside her, he was enveloped with a warmth that threatened to knock him unconscious. He tried not to look at her face as he felt the tremor in his veins. She was adjusting to accommodate him when he felt a swift rush of ecstasy to the tip of himself. He gave way before he could stop himself and collapsed on top of her, panting, loathing his release. He heaved himself off her after a minute and reclined on the wall next to her. She sat up in bed, flustered, trying to comprehend what had just happened. And then she stood up and walked around the bed to retrieve her underwear from the table. Because she was quiet, he said, "Sorry." She shrugged in the middle of getting into her underwear and said, without looking at him, "First time, na so it dey be." A few days later, Obifuna woke up with a fever. It escalated quickly, stiffening his joints, so that the nurse at the school clinic confined him to a bed. Under her close observation, his throat felt sore and parched, his appetite had gone, and he was unable to eat the food Jeku delivered from the refectory, managing only a few spoons when Senior Papilo arrived and fed him by hand. He drifted in and out of a fitful doze, only vaguely aware of Senior Papillo's presence next to him on a chair. The senior reaching out from time to time to feel his temperature with the back of his palm. There were times when he suffered mild hallucinations, when Angel's face, scrunched up with scorn, floated across his vision. At once taunting and terrifying. Obifuna still remembered the moment after the incident when he had sat next to her on the bed, fully dressed, waiting. Within him, something shrank even further in time to the clock's loud ticking, until Senior Papillo's knock on the door informed him that they were ready to leave. Senior Papillo had briefly searched his face without speaking, and as they walked out, Obifuna saw him wink at the woman who had lied to them about Angel earlier. They had arrived at the house just before lights out, and when Wisdom asked him where he had been, he muttered something about running errands for Senior Papillo. Jeku said you left class before prep was over. Wisdom said, we went to Senior Papillo's house to look for you, and neither of you was there. Did I say I was running the errand in his house? Obifuna retorted, lacing his voice with an edge sharp enough to discourage further interrogation. He craved a bath, but he knew it was too late, and the senior students would be on the prowl soon to whip the students still up after lights out. When the bell went off a few minutes later, he climbed into bed, uncomfortably aware of Angel's scent on his skin and the stickiness in his underwear. And he lay awake for a long time, looking up at the whitewashed ceiling. Now, he sat by the window in Senior Papillo's corner, watching as a group of junior boys trooped to the refectory for dinner. It was the third day into his illness. The worst phase of it had abated, but his tongue still had lingering clammy taste, and a persistent ache raged in his head. Across from him, Senior Papillo ideally listened in to a conversation in his corner. More than once, he made out Senior Papillo's eyes on him. He could tell from the conversation that Senior Papillo would be scaling the wall again today to go into town. To see Angel? Would they discuss him? It occurred to him then, with a sigh, that he was still here in Senior Papillo's corner after everything. He caught his faint reflection in the mirror, smiling a small, wan smile. He had begun, lately, to look at Senior Papillo, at their friendship, in a different way. Was this something Senior Papillo did with all his boys? An initiation of sorts? Something told him it was not the case. He had been specifically singled out, and he could not make out why. So far, he had been deprived of a private moment with Senior Papillo, although he wasn't confident about what he would say if he had the chance. Senior Papillo had finished his final exam the previous day. Obifuna had watched from the railings, along with his classmates, as the senior boys spilled across the field, running through the dormitories in jubilation. Soon, they began a game of hoisting one another up and throwing each other into a small algae-infested pool close to the school farm. Senior Papillo was one of the last people to be grabbed. It took an army to subdue him and hauled over, and he emerged from the pool wet and slimy, laughing. How did he do it? How was he able to radiate such light-heartedness when Obifuna felt this undoing in him? As if the world were shifting from beneath him. Afterwards, he sorted through Senior Papilo's things for what he could keep. He tried not to drop to the ground. The other boys openly schemed for the valuables, the large, sturdy cupboard, the soft, wide bed, the sleek brown sandals and white canvas, the buckets. Obifuna sat on the bed, holding on to the charcoal iron and uniforms he had naturally inherited, aware that Senior Papilo was watching him all the while. Later, with the boys long gone, Senior Papilo reached out to touch his knee and told him it would be alright. And he felt the urge right then to cry because it would not be alright at all. Obifuna felt Senior Papilo's hand on his shoulder and looked up. "There's someone I want you to see," Senior Papilo said. Obifuna glanced through the rows of bunk beds at the door. "Who?" "Not here," Senior Papilo said. "We'll head for the school farm in a few minutes." They followed the route that led to the brothel, but midway, Senior Papilo asked the driver to pull over and they went into a supermarket. Obifuna followed Senior Papilo, watching in astonishment as he took a few toiletries, including sanitary pads, over to the till. He followed as Senior Papilo crossed to the other side of the road and boarded another taxi, which drove in the direction from which they had come. Opposite the school, they alighted. Senior Papilo led the way down a short, narrow path. Obifuna looked up to see the sign for the girls' campus. A lump formed in his throat. Was Senior Papilo trying to get them caught? He almost opened his mouth to call out, but Senior Papilo was already rapping on the door in front of them. The viewer slid open. A pair of eyes peered at them. The man's expression became instantly guarded. "Yes?" he demanded. It was apparent strange young men were unwelcome around here. "Good evening, sir," Senior Papilo said. Obifuna almost smiled at the acquired tone. "Please, I'm here to drop off some things to my sister." The man frowned. "It's not visiting day." "I know, sir, but she called us to say that her provisions had run out, and our parents asked me to stop by since I'm just around the corner." "Who are you?" the man demanded. "I'm a student at the university in town, sir." "And who's this?" The man's eyes darted to Obifuna. "This is my cousin, sir. His name is Francis." Now the man frowned at Obifuna as if daring him to deny the name. He opened the door slightly and extended his hand to take the bag. Senior Papilo retreated. "Please, sir, I need to give her this myself. I also need to deliver a message to her from our parents." The man glared at him. "Young man, do you know the kind of trouble I could get into for letting you in when it's not visiting day?" Senior Papilo reached into his wallet for a naira note. "I'll be quiet and fast, sir," he said, extending an enclosed hand towards the man. "And you can have this one for beer." The man sighed, hesitating only briefly before taking the note from Senior Papilo and stepping aside to let them in. Obifuna was instantly taken by the beauty of the campus. It was far smaller than the boys, but with a graceful orderliness. From what he could see, buildings designed with identical stories and painted the same grey color as the sky, flatbed flowers hemming the driveway and classrooms, stuffing the air with a heady, sweet scent. The man motioned them into the gatehouse. "What did you say her name was?" he asked once they were inside. "Munachizo Amaeze SS3C," Papilo said. "And what's yours?" Papilo exhaled. "Obifuna Amaeze, sir." Obifuna shot a glance at him. Papilo looked straight ahead, his face carefully blank, until the man was out of the door, and then he let out a short laugh. He reached sideways to adjust Obifuna's collar, which didn't seem to need adjusting. "Get ready for when she comes," he said. "Why?" "She's coming with her school daughter, whom I want you to meet." So that was why Senior Papilo had him tag along. Obifuna stared at some graffiti on the wall. No doubt the nickname of a girl who did not want anyone to forget she was once here. The man returned moments later with a fat, chocolate-skinned girl, followed by a smaller one. "Papilo," she said, unsuccessfully masking her smile. The man shot an icy glance at Senor Papilo. "It's just something she calls me, sir," he explained quickly. "My real name is Obifuna." The man turned back to his logbook as they talked about their make-believe parents, supplying codes at intervals. Obifuna studied the small girl across from him. She was lithe, with an oval face that could pass for pretty and a stout parting on one side of her head. She sat with her knees pressed close together, her gaze focused on her palms, which were intertwined on her lap, aware Obifuna could tell that he was looking at her. He wondered how long it had taken Senor Papilo to orchestrate the meeting, what he hoped would come out of it. There was a knock on the outer door, and the man gave Senor Papilo a warning glance before he exited the room. Senor Papilo hurriedly took Munachiso in his arms. "I've missed you," he said into her neck, fondling her behind while she squirmed in his arms like an earthworm that had chanced on salt, suppressing giggles. "I waited for you on my birthday and you didn't turn up," she said when they disengaged. "Sorry, baby. You know how these things go." He picked up the bag from the seat. "But I didn't forget my gift." She took the bag from him, her eyes shining. "Thank you." She kissed him on the cheek. They talked some more before Senor Papilo gestured to the girl behind her. "So this is the girl." "Yes," Munachiso said, turning. "This is Rachel." Senor Papilo made appreciative sounds, nodding slowly. Obifuna tried not to yelp as Senor Papilo turned to him with a jab on the shoulder. "And here is my boy. His name is Obifuna." Rachel looked up just then. Obifuna was disconcerted by her gaze. It seemed to trace the width of his face without settling. He could see her teeth from where she bit down gently on her lips. In the silence, Obifuna was suddenly aware that all eyes in the room were on him. waiting for him. He felt like an actor who had suddenly forgotten his lines. Obifuna, Senior Papilo prompted. Obifuna looked at him. Don't keep a girl waiting, Senior Papilo said with an awkward laugh. This is the part where you ask her to be your girl. And that is where chapter 8 of part 2 ends. Let's talk about it. So in chapter 8 of part 2, we are back to Obifuna's boarding school, and around this time, it's about to be Christmas holiday, and students will be going back home to their family members, or their close ones, close relatives, and during this time, Obifuna also would have to be going back home. But we read in chapter 8 that Obifuna did not end up going to his home after he was told that he was going to be at his aunt's place that was in Owerri, which is also where the boarding school is. And his dad justified it by saying that it was closer. And he Obifuna accepted his fate that he would have to go to his aunt's house, even though deep down he wanted to see his mom and go back home. But due to what's going on, and his father's feelings about the whole situation, and now that he has this idea that what if his mom also now knows what's going on between him and a boy. But anyways, he goes to his aunt's house during this holiday break, and this thoughts that he had about her was kind of different when he went to his aunt's house. And she has this big house, and he has his room. He's able to watch TV, and he would only come out when he needs to greet her, from when she comes back from work. And so he had a slight bit of freedom when he was living with his aunt, and not as depressing, isolating like it was when he was at boarding school. And even his aunt is very concerned about his weight, and she cares about his appearance. She wants him to eat more, and so she's constantly trying to feed him, and I believe she even got the help in their house to make sure that he was eating very often, so that he was gonna obviously gain weight before he goes back to school. And so this was something that she felt strongly about, and this was something she wanted to make sure Obifuna, within the 2 weeks or so that he was gonna be in her house for the holiday, that he gained what he had lost between the months he was at boarding school. And so that's highlighted on, and later he goes back, or before he goes back, his mom calls to check up on him, to see if his aunt has been good to him, and he tells her what's going on. And then during that call, I think it was when he also thought to himself, he wondered if she's put the pieces of the puzzle together and realized what was going on with him and a boy, but yet she doesn't really talk about that or mention that when they have the brief call that they had. But yeah, later on she tells him she loves him, and then they end the call, and then before it was time for Obifuna to go back to school. And when he goes back, things are slightly different. Particularly, I want to talk about him and Senior Papilo's relationship. Senior Papilo, as I mentioned in my previous chapter video, is this famous / popular football player at the secondary school. He's well respected because how he treats juniors and the underclassmen, and he's just really kind of cruel as well. He's he beats and punishes the underclassmen. He does all these really mean things. But obviously Obifuna, if we go back to the previous chapters, we read that he's now become Senior Papilo's quote unquote boy, and so he basically helps him do things and run errands, and he gets sort of benefits from that, and also has its cons. And it also has its disadvantages because he sometimes gets punishments as well. And so during this time, it was around almost time. I think it was May, around almost May, and he Senior Papilo, had exams coming up and stuff like that. So there wasn't really time for Obifuna to sort of help him and go to his house as much as he used to. And it was sort of, he had less visits, or Senior Papilo barely sort of, summoned him for Obifuna to do things to him. But at some point, he summons Obifuna, and I remember reading that Obifuna just felt a, sort of deep sense of gratitude because he summoned him, which I found interesting, but slightly weird. But anyways, it sort of shows how Obifuna sort of submitted to him in a way, and obviously due to the benefits he gets and sort of how Snipapilo sort of started treating him and sort of this friendship that they're formed in a way. I don't know what to describe it, but yeah, he felt gratitude, and so when he goes to his place, he they have this little talk, and then he sort of asks him about his exams. And at some point, Obifuna asks, are you going into town today? And this was something that Senior Papilo would sometimes do to, this was something that Obifuna knew that Senior Papilo would sometimes do, and so he asked him about it. And then, Senior Papilo, questioned Obifuna and asked him that, would you like to come? And Obifuna obviously hesitated, and he's not sure because this is something that could possibly get him expelled, and this is something that could get him kicked out from the boarding school, so he's not sure if he wants to do this. But due to the fact that it's been a while since they sort of, he has done things with Senior Papilo, he at some point agrees to him going, and they sort of agree that they're gonna meet at the school farm. And then, when they get there, he also informs that another senior that Senior Papilo knows will also be coming with them. And so they all end up going together. I'm trying to keep this as short as possible. So, they end up, because this chapter was quite long, and I don't want to sort of ramble and talk too much. I want to keep it as short as possible. But they end up sort of going out of town, and they go to this sort of place, in which there are a bunch of sort of girls of different ages, older women. And as I was reading those parts, I started became worried, and I started having these thoughts that, oh my god, what are we getting into? And these, I believe, are sort of like prostitutes. And based on the conversations that even Senior Papilo had, one of the girls that he first approached, he, they were speaking in pidgin, and he sort of asked him about a girl who I believe Senior Papilo knew. Her name was Angel, and he sort of asks her about where's Angel, and in pidgin, obviously they're speaking pidgin, and she tells her that Angel is sort of busy today and stuff like that, but he still persists to continues to sort of ask, like, I want to see her and stuff like that. And then she sort of tells him where her room is, and they go in there, and Senior Papilo introduces Obifuna to this girl, and then it gets to a point, just to keep it short, Obifuna ends up, doing something with this woman who was obviously older than him, and I found it really weird reading that, and from the fact that Senior Papilo, sort of pushed Obifuna to do this, something he's never done. He's obviously this young boy who isn't really attracted to women. He has attraction towards men and boys, and this was really weird for him. But Senior Papilo sort of tells the lady that he's not a young boy, he's a man, and she could tell by just looking at him that he looked young, that Obifuna looked young. But she still proceeds to do this scenes with him, and they have this weird moment, and before you know it, Obifuna sort of just releases, and it was very short, but they sort of sit on the bed together, and it was very awkward sort of moment, and I just felt really disgusted reading those parts. But anyways, that sort of is done, and then he goes back to the boarding school, and his friend Jeku, his friend Wisdom sort of asks, where have you been? But obviously he lies and tells him that he's been running errands for Senior Papilo, even though deep down he knows that they went out of town to do really disgusting and weird things. But he doesn't want to tell him that because he doesn't want him to think of him as weird. And then later, we read about how just Obifuna, despite what had happened, he continued to sort of surround himself with Senior Papilo. And, I think it's because of his fear of just not wanting to, have Senior Papilo, now want to punish him for, not following his instructions or not doing whatever he sort of suggested they should do together. And it was really weird. And then we have this other moment in which they go out of town again. And this time, though, they weren't going to the place that they went. They went to this girl's secondary school, because he goes to an all-boys secondary school, but now he goes to this all-girls secondary school, and they sort of go to the school with this sort of false identity, telling the gate man that they're here to see a sister. No, well, Senior Papilo tells the man that he's here to see his sister, and sort of gives them this false name, and tells them that Obifuna is his cousin, and he gives Obifuna this fake name, and then they go into the building or the compound, and they sort of wait for these girls, and then the girls come out. Her name was Mumbias, sorry, I forgot her name, but I remember her last name was Amaese, and they go to this school, and she comes with this additional sort of school daughter, as Senior Papilo described it. And when we read, almost towards the end, we find out that this sort of girl that he came to see was actually somebody he was, I believe, dating, and he sort of comes to give her a gift. And then he also tells Obifuna there's a girl that was going to come along. And sort of what Senior Papilo does is that he sort of initiates that, Obifuna sort of speaks to the girl, and that the girl that Mubia Biso, I feel like I'm saying her name wrong, but I'm just going to give her a nickname, M. So M sort of, brings this girl, and this girl, St. Papilo, sort of telling Obifuna that, this is going to be a girl, and I don't know if that's exactly what he said, but he was sort of initiating that. Obifuna makes them move, and then they become sort of boyfriend and girlfriend. And all these things, just reading all these things was really, awkward, honestly. And I could imagine how, from just the moment in which he had to have sex with this older woman, and then to the part, and this was his first time ever doing such a thing, and so he was just really panicked. He was sort of gasping. He just was really anxious about the whole situation, and then also now being put in this position in which he had to speak to this other girl at the secondary school that he has never met, but because Senior Papilo sort of initiated, he sort of has to sort of do it, and they're in this compound now, and they've put up this fake identity, so Obifuna sort of has to do what he says. But yeah, that's sort of where chapter 8 ends. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I know this was a long chapter, but I hope you please subscribe. But I hope you continue to support my channel, and you continue to watch my upcoming chapter videos, as I'll be reading part 2, chapter 9 next. I'm so excited to continue to just be immersed into this whole book and getting to talk to it with you guys, and just getting to talk about it with you guys really means a lot to me. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please kindly subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you